This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, website, or online store, make your next move with Squarespace. I had a message from someone this week. She said one person told me that he didn't like my photo. There was no constructive criticism, just I don't like this, it's awful. I couldn't see a real name or find any of their work. I was sad and a little enraged. It made me want to give up. It actually really annoys me when I hear of beginner photographers who are excited to start putting their work online for the first time, but when they do, they're driven off by loud, often very opinionated, very middling photographers who are just thumping their chest and protecting their patch. And on the other side of the same coin, I know some brilliant photographers who said they will never post their work online because they just don't want to have to deal with nasty commenters or people criticizing not understanding what they're trying to do. And I think that's a tragedy, because wasn't the internet supposed to be a place where we all freely express ourselves and share our work with each other? But we're all well aware that the reality is that if we post work online, we will get people coming past to criticize regularly. It's just, unfortunately, the way the internet works. And I, for one, don't want you to be put off sharing your work with the rest of us just because of a loud minority who don't behave very well. So today, because I've been doing this for a little while now, sharing work online, and because I've had to deal with a fair amount of criticism myself, I thought I would share with you some perspectives that I put in place in my head that help me to deal with criticism when it comes in. And hopefully you'll keep them in your own mind when the critics come calling on your corner of the internet. Let's start with this. There seems to be this false assumption out there that if we post our work online, and I've heard people say this, that we're inviting people to criticize it. Now, we all know that if we post work online, people will criticize it, but there's a big difference between that being the reality and that being our intent for posting that work there in the first place. We just all know that people are people. Everyone has an opinion, and the most arrogant amongst us will jump on everyone else's work and say what they have to say because they assume everyone needs to hear it. But that's very different from actually asking for it. I mean, most artists who post their work online actually have something they're trying to say. That's why they're sharing their work with you. And they want you to spend time with that message. They're not looking for your cheap rating out of 10. But we know that if we post our work online, criticism will come. And so we have to learn how to deal with it. I think about it like this. I split all criticism into 3 different categories, and I deal with each of those categories differently. So let's start with the first one. Let's call it artistic criticism. Now, artistic criticism is done by professionals. These are people who have spent years studying the arena that they're commenting in. They're deeply informed, and they're also not involved in the art that they're commenting in personally, so that they can't be accused of just criticizing to just malign colleagues. It's the difference between a professional film critic saying that the Avengers movies aren't very well constructed, and Martin Scorsese standing up and going, hey, these are terrible and they're not even real cinema. He's a fantastic filmmaker, no one questions that, but because he's in that arena as well, those comments caused a stir because it can start to sound like he's just jealous about the ticket sales of the Avengers movies. But artistic critics have a role to play. They're the ones who've done the deep dive into history to learn everything about that genre and bring all that context to their opinion, and they give their opinions, hopefully, in dispassionate, unbiased ways. They're often very articulate, very well spoken, and well respected, often even by those that they're criticizing. And the best artistic critics will actually teach average people like you and me how to better engage with a particular art form, how to understand it and read it in context and appreciate it on a deeper level. I've been watching the latest series of MasterChef recently, and one of my favorite rounds in that show are where the chefs get to cook for the critics. Because you sit and listen to these people, these professionals who have eaten thousands of meals in some of the best restaurants in the world. So when they're tasting the work that those chefs are creating, they're comparing the artistry of what they're eating with this extensive back catalogue of some of the best food in the world. So when compliments come from critics like this, they mean way more. And when criticism comes, even if it's harsh, you know that it's well informed and hopefully fairly dealt. In a similar vein, I'm a big fan of film critic Mark Kermode, and I've listened to the podcast he's done with Simon Mayo on 5 Live for well over 10 years now, and read a couple of his books. And I find that listening to him talking about films, talking about the history and the context of filmmaking and where that film appears in it, I'm better able to recognize the nods that filmmakers are giving to the past, the influences they have in their work and how it shapes things, and it's deepened my appreciation of filmmaking. Listening to him, he's taught me how to recognize good, solid story structure, to recognize a well-rounded character, and to appreciate really tightly written scripts with realistic dialogue. And listening to his take on the blockbusters of the last decade, I'm now no longer fooled by spectacle. I need substance. And we often forget that an artistic critic's job is not to tell the artist they should do it differently and try and direct their work. They're actually facing the other way. An artistic critic is actually pointed towards the public and telling them where they believe in their expert opinion the public should be spending their money in terms of buying movie tickets or booking tables at fancy restaurants. An artistic criticism is never done out of avarice or malice or ill intent. In fact, the best critics really respect those that they're criticizing, even when giving a bad review, because they understand the skill it takes for them to do what they do. I wanted to paint you this little picture of what proper criticism looks like, because I think you can see straight away this is a million miles away from the stuff we have to deal with online every day, but we'll get to them in a minute. The second category of criticism we'll call constructive criticism. Now, you don't have to be a professional to give this sort of criticism. All you have to do is genuinely care about the work you're commenting on and the person who made it. And as the one putting their work out there online, you'll recognize this sort of criticism when it comes at you because it has a totally different flavor to it. It's always polite, it's always respectful, it has useful information in it, often suggestions for change, and it always has a tone of humility to it. And humility is important because anyone who's giving constructive criticism recognizes that they weren't actually asked for their opinion in the first place. I mean, personally, I've never jumped on anyone's work online to tell them that I think it's terrible and they just had to hear that from me today because that's how I felt. I don't understand the impulse. For me, when I have, on the rare occasion, commented on someone's work critically, it's because I genuinely care about what they're doing, and then I never do it publicly. I always direct message them or send them an email privately and let them know that I have their best interests in heart and I really enjoy what they do in general, and this criticism is because I'm invested in their journey. I'm even very careful about giving critiques when I'm asked for them. I won't do critiques now unless I can sit over a table with you one-on-one in the real world, face-to-face. And I want to spend at least an hour. I want to know your story, who you are, where you come from, how you see the world, what you're trying to achieve and how you're trying to get there. Because after I've listened to all that, and you can tell that I really care, when I say something afterwards that might be critical, you know it's because I'm invested in your journey and I'm informed, I understand what you're trying to do. But sometimes constructive criticism can come through our public comments section, and we need to learn how to recognize it. Not just knee-jerk reaction, push it away because it sounds critical. Recognize it for what it really is, because that stuff can be gold for us. It takes a lot of self-awareness and humility to receive those comments, but I think it's the sign of a healthy artist who can do that, who can take that constructive criticism on board, and even maybe turn around to the person who took the time and thank them for caring enough to invest in your journey. And the last category, and this is the stuff that we're all most used to online, let's call it armchair criticism. These are the angsty keyboard warriors, the people sitting in the comfort of their own homes, angrily typing out criticisms at everybody else's work, all the while hiding themselves in the anonymity of the internet. They're easy to spot, their comments are invariably negative, they lack any nuance or empathy or any kind of intelligent commentary on your work. They show no compassion or genuine interest in what you're trying to do. They're often brash and attention-seeking and usually just rude for rudeness' sake. There are no useful suggestions in what they're saying, and sometimes subtly, but usually blatantly, they're trying to let you know that they know way more than you about what you're doing, and when they do what you do, it comes out much better than what you're doing. Their goal at the end of the day is to bring you down while building themselves up. And these are the people who, if you push back even a little bit, you'll get responses like, "It's just my opinion," or "I'm just being honest with you," or "You can't take criticism, can you?" And they were waiting for this. The whole point of the interaction with you was to see if they could hurt your feelings a little bit. And if they see that they can affect you in some way and get a reaction from you, they feel like they won some kind of imaginary power game which makes them feel good. It's all pretty gross. They will also say things and act in ways that they just never would in real life. I mean, imagine if you were sitting down at your local coffee shop and some guy bursts in through the front door and just says, "The decor in here is shocking, the coffee's terrible, and I don't even know what's going on with that barista's facial hair." A stunned coffee shop owner at that point is probably going to go, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, if you have complaints, please let's just step into the back office, we can sit down, have a chat about it. I'm very happy to listen to anything you have to say." And imagine at that point, the guy just ramps things up and yells at the coffee shop owner, "Well, if you don't want people coming in here and criticizing your decor and your coffee and your barista's faces, then you shouldn't have opened a coffee shop in the first place." At this point, there is probably a very stunned silence in the room because everybody understands there's a very unstable person present and the police are about to be called. We don't put up with this sort of behavior in real life. And I don't think we have to put up with it online either. So who are these people who just have to let you know that their opinion is your work sucks? Well, I think most of them are frustrated creatives themselves, people who are trying to create work and it's just not getting any traction or attention and they feel angry about that. They feel like they deserve it. But they found you, and you might be getting some traction or attention. And the fact that they feel the need to bring you down a peg is a compliment of sorts. And where they would never approach you in real life to say the things they're saying, the internet gives them an anonymity that emboldens them, where they feel like they can get away with it. Psychologist John Sula did a study about how we treat each other online, and he coined the phrase the online disinhibition effect. He suggests things like a lack of real names or faces, a lack of consequences for any sort of aggression, a lack of empathy or understanding that we're talking to actual human beings on the other end of our comments, a fantastical reading of how our criticisms are being read and how people think we're just brilliant for having said it, which is very rarely true, and the lack of any kind of authority. All these things create a soup where people feel emboldened to say things to you they would never say to your face in real life. Psychologist Sherry Turkle talks about the fact that eye contact is a key ingredient in moderating aggression between human beings, and obviously that's impossible in a comment section. When we can't look into each other's eyes, we can dehumanize each other and ramp that aggression up. So we all know this stuff. Psychologists have studied it, and the internet itself is a brand new thing. It's only been around for a minute in evolutionary terms, and we still need to learn as a species how to use it like adults. And unfortunately for many, it's still a place where they can revert back to something much more primitive and aggressive, and that's a real shame. But there are ways we can learn to deal with armchair critics until we all learn to grow up a bit. I have a rule for myself which you might find useful, and that is to take any criticism seriously. It has to be given on an equal playing field. By that I mean that if you put your work online next to your real name and your real face, if someone wants to criticize that work, they also have to give you their real name, their real face, and some of their work so you know where the criticism's coming from. If they insist on hiding behind the anonymity of the internet, you are under no obligation to deal with them. The fact is that most armchair critics will never give you their real name or show you their real work, and the reason for that is very simple, and I've said it in a previous video. You will never find a talented troll. Mindlessly negative comments don't come from great photographers or artists of any sort. Photographers like Salgado or McCurry or Irwin aren't going around trolling on people's blogs. Bruce Gilden might. That's a joke. Great photographers don't do that. They're busy producing beautiful work. They don't have time for stupid games like that. Great photographers don't troll. Middling, frustrated, angry photographers do. You are under no obligation to suffer fools. But when dealing with armchair critics, they will come straight back at you and say that the problem is you just can't take criticism. That's not the case at all. I just can't take rudeness. I won't abide unkindness or mindless negativity, especially when it has that whiff of yelled insecurity about it. So what can you actually do about it? Well, the first thing you could do is to push back. Now, I don't actually recommend this, but if you're like me, sometimes you can't help yourself. I actually had someone comment on a video the other day saying, I like this channel and I enjoy the videos, but I also kind of like the saltier Sean who pushes back with negative comments on Instagram. I probably still have the slightly narcissistic view that if I push back with people, I'll break through somehow and we'll be able to have a constructive conversation that will lead to somewhere good. But the fact is, that never happens, and I'm not changing anybody's mind, and most people who comment negatively on your work, they're not there for an adult discussion anyway. The only rule I have for myself when pushing back is that I always need to make sure I'm being a little bit more polite, a little bit more gentle, and a little bit more generous than they are. I'll let them set the tone, and then I'll try lift it a little bit so that it doesn't constantly get dragged down. It very rarely works, to be honest, and I usually have to move on to another option. Speaking of which, we can just ignore them. Most people leaving mindlessly negative comments on your work are only doing it for the attention, and giving it to them is way too generous. I read a great article on researching this called Behind the Online Comments, The Psychology of Internet Trolls, and this is what the author says. He says, trolling is a status-enhancing activity. By attracting readers' attention, upsetting people, sparking heated debates, and even gaining approval from others, trolls can feel important, perhaps much more important than they are in their real lives. Thus, trolling is yet another internet activity that promotes narcissistic motives, since trolls may be expected to be far less successful in attracting people's attention in their physical world. The only effective antidote to their tactic is to ignore them. But even then, trolls won't suffer a public humiliation because nobody knows who they are. This is what makes trolling so ubiquitous. It requires no skills other than the ability to be obnoxious. Ignoring mindlessly negative people is like starving a fire of its oxygen. And if they still won't be dissuaded, you can block them. It's important to say that you don't have to run some kind of democracy for rude people on your little corner of the internet. If people are trying to constantly drag attention onto themselves using your platform, it's absolutely okay to block them. People will push back with you. They have with me, and claim that I'm killing their right to free speech, that they should be allowed to say whatever they want to say on the internet. But I don't run the internet. I do run my little channel though, and I do run my Instagram, and you run your Flickr account or your YouTube channel, your Instagram, and you're allowed to block people in that space. That's why you've been given that button. They are still free to say anything they want on the internet. They just have to say it in their space or in some online forum that will have them. You don't have to allow them on yours. And I think it's helpful to think about that. You moderate the conversation in the space that you run. Now, hopefully you have the integrity to not just block all criticism when it comes in, constructive criticism or any sort of criticism, because you don't want to hear any. That's an integrity issue for you, and you need to make sure you're open to the good stuff. But when that mindless negativity comes, it's your job to set the conversation on your YouTube channel, or set the tone on your blog, or set the topic on your Flickr page. That's your space, and you're allowed to take ownership of that. The University of Wisconsin-Madison did a study where they found that the nastier the comments in a comments section would actually drive and polarize people apart while they were talking about the content of the top, and it would totally swing the topic away from what the subject matter was. And they call it the nasty effect. It's well worth looking up. So because we know that, I think it's okay to take ownership of the spaces we run online and try and create healthy communities. If you don't trust the intentions of someone who constantly comments with mindless negativity, block them. It's okay. It's why you've been given that button. You're allowed to. I've been lucky enough on this channel that I've only had to block about 40 people, and amongst tens of thousands of commenters, that's really not bad going. But I've had no compunctions about blocking those 40. And it's got nothing to do with avoiding criticism. I've had some really good constructive criticism on this channel that's led to great conversations that have been respectful on both ends, and I really enjoy that kind of stuff. But I won't let attention seekers pull focus. So I hope this has helped you. I would imagine not many of us, myself included, are having to deal with professional artistic critics at this stage, but it's good to know about that sort of thing, to have the high watermark of what criticism should be, unbiased and informed. And remember to stay open to constructive criticism, even if it's painful. In fact, when it's most painful is when we know it's most true. So that's when we need to take it on board. And if we have the humility to do that, we will develop ourselves more. And we can even turn around and thank the person who gave us that criticism for helping us on our journey. And when the armchair critics come around, push back if you want. Just know you're probably not going to get anywhere constructive, and you're likely giving them exactly what they want. It's always best just to ignore them or to block them. And it's okay to do that, to protect your space and then get back to work. I want to leave you with this famous quote by Theodore Roosevelt. "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better, The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. So remember, you're the one in the arena. You're the one putting yourself out there. Ignore the bloviating armchair critics, those cold and timid souls hiding behind online anonymity. You're the one in the arena. You're the brave one. Couple of things before I go. For those of you who missed my recent update video, Collection 3 is now out. It's 90 images from last year, 45 color, 45 black and white, peppered throughout with quotes from some of the videos from last year. These are limited edition, and amazingly in the last 2 weeks you guys have cleaned out over half my stock. So if you want one, grab one now, don't wait. They will be gone soon, and I don't have plans to reprint. The other thing is I've started to do monthly emails. I've already sent out the first, and in those I just give recommendations for books to read, photographers to follow, movies to watch, podcast episodes, some of my movements and travel so we can organize meetups, some of the events I'm involved with, so hopefully you can come out. If you'd like to be on that list, head across to my website, click on the contact page, and there's a block on the top of the page where you can fill in your email address to be added to the list. And thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this episode. If you need a website or a domain, they're a fantastic option. I've used them myself for my own personal work for 8 or 9 years now. As I said, I've started doing monthly email campaigns, and I'm doing all that within Squarespace. They've got some beautiful template designs that keep the look and feel close to your website, and then you can drag in blog posts or items from your store because it's all integrated. Couldn't be easier and looks really, really clean. And then once you've sent it out, you can check the statistics for how many people have opened your email, how many people have clicked on links, so you can work out how your audience is interacting with the work you're sending out there. Start your free trial today at squarespace.com and go to squarespace.com/Sean Tucker to get 10% off your first purchase.